Hi, thank you for tuning in. Just a quick note before we get started. The conversations on this podcast are open and honest, and sometimes they cover sensitive or controversial topics. The opinions you'll hear are those of the guests and not necessarily mine or the show's. Listener discretion is advised. Now, let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Phoenix and Friends podcast, where we bring you a little bit of motivation, inspiration, and light, one conversation at a time. This week, we have a very special episode with the Insure Our Survival Campaign. And from that campaign, joining me is my very special guest, Etienne Stott. Etienne, how are you doing today?
Yeah, thank you, Phoenix. I'm doing good. Busy times and exciting times, but also, of course, challenging and difficult times. But I'm doing a good effort, and I feel good about that. Thank you.
Amazing. Let's dive into it. Today is the launch of the Insure Our Survival Campaign. So please let everyone at home know what it's all about.
Yeah, so Insure Our Survival is a campaign basically around putting pressure on insurers because insurers hold the key to some of the most damaging and destructive industries on earth. And we're targeting specifically insurers that are enabling ecocide, damaging the planet and damaging ecosystems, producing, enabling massive carbon bomb projects, but also we're also targeting insurers that are enabling the arms industry. And right now we know that a lot of arms are being used to commit war crimes and genocide in Gaza. So we are hoping to put pressure on two insurers, AXA and AIG, because we feel that this is essential. They've got a key role, and if we can put pressure on them, they can change their ways, and that can have a real influence on reducing the harm in the world and setting us on a path to a better place.
That sounds incredible. I'm so interested by the meeting of different causes there as well, as you said, both ecocide and genocide. So as you said, with insurance companies, get a little bit more into that, into how they are culpable in both of those and what it is exactly that you're aiming to do.
Okay, yeah. So to do anything in the world as a corporation, as an industry, you need permission from the government, you need finance, and you need insurance. Insurance is absolutely essential for any expansion, for any factory, for any project. You need in various insurances, and insurance therefore has a key thing, because if you can't get insurance for your arms factory, or you can't get insurance for your pipeline, then even if you've got the finance and you've got permission from the government, your project won't go ahead. So insurance is the weak link in this in this, we believe, because, for example, the big company that we're targeting, AXA, which is a big insurer in Europe and the UK, they insure people's pets, their homes, their cars, and all sorts of things like that. They make about 80% of their money from ordinary people like you and I, who are just, looking to protect their future, in various ways. Um, the remaining 20% of their money, that the profits they make, come from various things. But we've done, we've read research, and we've been getting lots of information and facts, and it shows that these insurers profit, but about 2% of their profits comes from the fossil fuels and the arms industries. So therefore, they're kind of making only a fairly small amount of the massive amounts of money that they're making from these terrible, terrible areas. And we think if we can expose this situation and tell people about what they're doing, we know, again, around about somewhere between 50 and 80% of people, if they have the facts, will try to choose ethically when they come to buying a product, whatever that is, toilet paper, insurance, or their bread, or whatever it is. And so we think that if we can expose AXA and AIG, the other company that we're targeting in this wave, that people will be thinking twice. And if they enough people decide actually we're not going to get insured with them, this will put their profits under threat. That 80% of the profits that they're making will be under threat from the 2% of profits that they take from these ecocidal and war crime enabling companies. So we think actually it's a good bet that Elfing actually will just jettison these working with these companies and will go and do something else because they can make plenty of money in other places. And it's worth noting that, as well as directly insuring these companies or these projects, depending on what exactly they're doing, very often they take the money that we give them as our insurance premiums and they invest them in companies as well. So a lot of insurance companies have investment arms and they take that money, to take our money and invest it into stuff that we think, if people knew what they were investing in and what they were insuring, they would not like that and they might choose to go elsewhere. So our targets in for the Insure Our Survival, the September wave that we've just started, are basically to expose AXA, this huge insurance company in UK and Europe, and also AIG, which is not so big in Europe, but it's much bigger around the world. And AIG, one of the big things that we're really wanting to expose and make sure everyone knows about, is that they have not ruled out this thing called the ECOP, or the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline, which is one of the most horrendous projects you can think of for so many reasons. It's basically like a pipe just to extract wealth from Africa and give it to already rich and wealthy countries and companies at the expense of the people who live there, polluting, displacing. And that's not even before we get to the actual carbon impact of what will happen when all that oil is extracted. So AIG are particularly on our target list here because of this, their refusal to rule out insuring ECOP, which we think is just an emblematic kind of fight, and it brings our movement, connects us to what is going on in the front lines around the world. And so many of these insurance companies are doing stuff around the world that if we knew what was actually the impact on people's lives in those places, I think a lot of people would change their minds.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sounds like such a huge campaign as well. So what is the scope of this campaign? How many people are you aiming to reach? And obviously, the influence of that is going to be felt in East Africa, in the Middle East as well.
Mm.
So how many people are you trying to reach with this, and what is it that you want them to do?
Yeah, thank you. So we have to be explaining, we're a grassroots, a small organization, a small team, but we're trying to get this idea out there. There's already organizations who are investigating and finding the facts out on these insurance companies. And we're trying to give this information to the hands of people, and then they can choose to do a boycott. We want them to boycott AXA and AIG and never use them ever again, or any of their subsidiaries. And there's also two other companies that I should also mention, and they all begin with A, and that's Allianz and Aviva. These are another two that are just kind of like second and third on our kind of, and they are also horrendous companies. So we say there's a place you can go to called, if you visit a website called Boycott Bloody Insurance, they've done a huge amount of research, and they've got an insurer grading, and you can have a look at where your insurers are on that list, and you can try and choose accordingly. We're not saying that's easy, but we do know that if we can really put the squeeze onto AXA and AIG and show that this method can work, then other insurance companies might be thinking, oh, well, we don't want to be next on this list. And we already know that targeting insurance companies has proven to be effective. So in terms of the number of people that we're hoping to reach, we just want to reach as many people. We need obviously people's help to do that. This September wave that we're starting in London has got links globally. We're hoping that there will be actions, decentralized but autonomous actions around in the Americas, in Asia, in Europe, and in Africa as well. So we're hoping to really kind of and Australasia as well. There's something going on in New Zealand as well, we believe. So we are kind of holding that. We're not telling people what to do. We're kind of inviting people to come and join in the action here and get to find out. And also, once people start to know, spread the word. Tell people about what these insurance companies are doing. Tell your family, tell your friends. Again, we think most people just don't want to be involved in this stuff if they can avoid it. And a lot of people do have the ability when it comes to choosing their insurance to choose different companies. So the idea is, we're going to start telling people. We've already had a wave in July that went around the UK, and we're going to hopefully kind of get people talking about this around the world. And if any luck, we never know how things can grow, but we want people to know AXA and AIG, no good.
Tell me more about that global coordination as well, because that sounds quite incredible to see that people are communicating this message and that protests are being planned decentralized, but that people are really communicating and that these issues are intersecting in this way and how that has been.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's really interesting to see because, for example, in the UK environmental movement, I'd say quite a few people know about ECOP because it is just such a gross and disgusting business. It's just it's horrendous. You can look at it. The facts are just diabolical. It's 1,400 kilometers. I'm just going to explain this because I think it's worth. I can talk about a pipeline all day, but this pipeline is not just a pipe; it's a heated pipeline because the oil that comes out of the ground um, is so gloopy. It has to be heated, of course, by fossil fuels to get it to be runny enough to be piped all the way to the coastline. So it goes all the way through Uganda and Tanzania, runs down the side of Lake Victoria, and Lake Victoria is the drinking water, I think, for 40 million people. And around in those parts of the world, we know these companies are careless, they are violent, um, leaks happen, people get displaced, protesters get disappeared, they get all sorts of stuff going on. And this just shows, I just wanted to kind of add that in there. It's super important that people know. We're trying to connect what we're doing here in London, because there's an office in London of AIG, and they know, they should know what's going on. People around walking past in London, the employees in AIG probably have no idea that they're working for a company that's doing this. So we're trying to bring their voices of frontline activists in Uganda and Tanzania, bring them out there, trying to explain to people, because again, people, when they hear about what goes on, will hopefully think more carefully. And I think uh, the idea is, we've been reaching out to organizations, trying to build these relationships. Of course, it's a process. It takes some trust building. We'll have to see how many organizations and groups pick up the baton here. But we're hoping this could, even be the start, and momentum will build as well. And then once people know about this stuff, once groups in the different parts of the world start to know about this, they might think, actually, yeah, insurance is this kind of weak link in this chain, and we can really put some pressure on it directly by exposing them, boycotting these companies, and showing what they're up to. And we from Insure Our Survival's point of view, you asked, the kind of method or the idea is that we have decentralized, we're not in control of all these actions that go on all around the world. They just picking up what we're doing. We share, messaging and strategy and targets, and we give support to groups, especially in the global south, who might need a little bit more support than some of the groups that we work with in the UK and North America and Europe, who are often got enough means and perhaps in situations where they can, act a little bit more easily. And we're trying to support those groups if they need it, but we know there's lots of very capable groups out there who might be persuaded that insurance is a good lever that they can pull as hard as they can, because this is a good bet, I think, for the environmental movement to put a spanner in the cogs. And again, I think it's also worth really reiterating, all these companies have profited from arms, from war crimes, and from investing in war criminal organizations, that have been designated as such by the UN. So again, we're watching the news, probably even as we speak right now, some of the weapons, some of the companies that are being insured or have been invested in by the companies we're targeting, some of their weapons will be or will have committed war crimes today or maybe even right now. So if you want to put a spanner in the works of those companies, then also AXA and AIG are worth targeting, because again, these companies can't operate without insurance. And it is worth also explaining that every time a big insurer pulls out of a project or pulls out of a insuring certain thing, then it actually raises the perceived risk for other insurers. So other insurers go, oh, if they're pulling out, then maybe we should not be in there. And that can actually ratchet up and raise the insurance premiums to a point where actually it becomes perceived as too risky and too financially problematic. And it basically means that the project can become kind of unprofitable or can get stuck in the long grass, basically. So we think this is a really good thing to do for these reasons, and it's bringing together. And again, I don't know, some of your listeners will know their companies around the world that time and time again their names come up in connection with all sorts of horrible, shady, nasty, dirty, polluting businesses. I'm thinking, for example, of Barclays Bank, because the UK Barclays Bank is one of those things, always on the wrong side of history. And as it turns out, AXA and AIG are one of those companies that are far too involved with two of the most destructive and damaging industries in the world and in the history of humanity, which is the fossil fuel industry and the arms industry. So we've got a real chance here, and we just think it's a matter of trying to push it and explain it to people, and maybe they will pick this baton up and pull on that lever as hard as they can.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like such an incredible and really, really important campaign. And I'm very, very struck by that, what you said about empowering activists from the global south who often don't get their voices heard in the global north, especially thanks to our media. And at the end of the day, ultimately, a lot of the time, because of our actions here in the global north, such as insurance, it's there that the impact is really felt a lot of the time. And especially when we're talking about things like global warming, when we're talking about things like mass migration caused by global warming, at the end of the day, the global south is a place that is feeling the impact right now, even more than the rest of us. We kind of noticing little changes in our weather, but for them, it's really already an existential crisis. So I think that's so important and powerful to kind of link together, because it is a global crisis that we're facing. Um, in terms of that coordination, how has that been for you as well, just on a personal level, to kind of get to interact and hear these firsthand stories and interact with different people and hear those human stories as well, rather than just a lot of statistics and facts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. It's very hard to get a sense of just how grim and brutal life can be in these frontline communities. Thinking of we, for example, I've been involved in things with Extinction Rebellion, about BP's actions in the Niger Delta, um, and hearing about what's going on around ECOP. And also, in North America, there's huge issues with pipelines running across the land of First Nations peoples, and all sorts of horrendous treatment of people who are just looking after kind of where they live and what they are connected to. And I think it does need to be made real. We know, depending on where you live, climate change might just feel like a little bit of a hot summer, or you might get an odd nasty storm, right? But for some people, it is ruining their lives, and it's ruining people's lives in the UK, in Europe, in North America, in the global north. We know. But our very often we see that and we just think, oh, whatever. We see it on the news, and it happens, and we somehow manage to move on. But as you say, the voices from these places that are further away, with people who don't look like me, that people of color, who are being affected, whose lives are being ruined, and it's literally just, it just doesn't even register. So people, when you hear a story, when you hear what it's like, and when you actually imagine what it's like to wake up one day, in fear of your life and in fear of your entire future, not just because of global warming and the fact that you're going to suffer extreme heat, but because there's a company that wants where you live to be cleared, and they want to take you away, and they don't care. Your life is like a speck of dirt on their books. They can find ways to get rid of you. And I think it is important because I suppose in our culture, lots of references in film and TV shows are about rebellions and resistances. Famous acts of resistance to the bad colonial or imperial powers in all these different metaphors. And actually, we're saying, look, this is happening right now. It just isn't. It isn't just in Star Wars or whatever. Do you know what I mean? This is right now, and it's exactly what's going on in Gaza. We can see this the way this is being the way this is happening, and the way that I think many people are realizing this is being hidden from us is actually, there's an active process of this being hidden, minimized, so that people are either confused or completely in the dark, really. I think the curtain is being kind of pulled aside, and certainly in Gaza, it's, to me, unequivocal. We can see it with our own eyes. There may be mainstream media and maybe even our own governments, not maybe, absolutely our own governments and our mainstream media are trying to argue that black is white and white is black, and it's all kind of more or less justified. But we can tell deep down, most people in their heart of hearts are like, this is wrong, and our governments are out of step. And again, just to tie it back, we do have the power. This is one way that we do. We can't, stop these things very directly, although there are people out there who've got ways and do methods to do that. We think that insurance is a thing that people can get hold of and can feel good. They can say, actually, yeah, I'm feeling good about what I've done here because I have withdrawn my consent for this horrific business. I'm paying them my money, and they're making my life more unsafe, and they're making people in the world we can. I think that's a nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so powerful what you said, and that image of yeah, it is essentially our money that we give to these companies that ends up funding them to do those kind of projects and gives them the power to change people's lives like that and take people's lives and livelihoods and land and homes away. And that by not giving them that access to that money, that takes a huge part of their power away in that sense. Um, for you as well, personally, I know that you, when we had a conversation, said that you weren't always an environmentalist. So, what was your changing point to really get into that and inspire you to kind of dedicate so much of your time to trying to make a change?
I mean, I think it's quite a long story, right? I'll try and start and do a kind of short version, quite long version. But I mean, I'm an Olympic champion in canoeing, in canoe slalom, a sport which some of your listeners probably never heard of. Some of you might have heard of it. But I dedicated most of my adult life, most of my youth, I'm 46 now, to the pursuit of excellence in that sport. But my journey in that started in the Scouts, sometimes called the Boy Scouts. And I first went canoeing in the Scouts in a town where I used to live. And I guess in the Scouts, we used to go around in forests, hiking, playing games, and the kind of being out in nature. I don't think I remember it kind of being like, oh, yes, I'm out in nature. But we thought it was super cool and super fun. And getting involved in canoeing, the story to get into that was, kind of via kind of an interesting story as well, because I was I really wanted to be a fighter pilot when I was a kid. I got influenced really, really strongly by that. And now I kind of really glad that I never went down that road because it'd be horrible. Um, but for that, I needed to be good at sports and I needed to be working hard at school. So it kind of helped me to get on the straight and narrow. And I was never sporty. There's no sporty people in my family. But because of my ambition to become a fighter pilot, I started taking up sports. And when I went to the Air Cadets, which is like a kind of what's the word, a kind of incubation for future soldiers in this country, I really hated it and disliked it horribly, and I basically switched, and I said, actually, I don't want to do that. And I think in the end, all that energy and passion for doing something went into canoeing, and I dedicated my life to canoeing. And by the time I was 33, we won the Olympics in London 2012, which for people in the UK, London 2012, I think we can argue with lots of people would say it's probably one of the high watermark for UK, because it was a moment when the whole country, yes, was united in joy and passion, and it was a kind of a nice thing. It wasn't a horrible thing like COVID, where we were united in kind of dark times and misery. Even though for some people it was quite nice to have some time off work, whatever. And that gave me kind of this platform, and I felt really strongly that, a sporting platform we know has a big influence culturally, and I wanted to, even towards the end of my career, I wanted to use that power more, for good, not just for selling, breakfast cereals or energy drinks. So I wanted to do that, and after I retired in 2016, I met a guy called Dave Hampton who was a rower, and he believed in the power of sport to change the world. Nelson Mandela spoke about this early on in the history of what is now kind of like the more recent South Africa, and he said sport has the power to reach millions and to change people's lives. And me and Dave, on the back of this idea, founded this thing called Champions for Earth, which was about empowering athletes. And just a little short time later, Extinction Rebellion came along, and I, some of your listeners will know this. I hope they will, and if they don't, then it's really interesting to learn about. But Extinction Rebellion empowered thousands upon thousands of people around the world with a kind of fairly simple kind of code. They said, look, we've got the science on one hand, we've got non-violent direct action in the other, and if we merge those things, we can put real pressure and make change. And at the same time was Greta Thunberg and the Fridays for Future. And I guess for me, now I look back, I don't know, I suppose I got drawn into this because I wanted to make a positive difference in my life. I wanted my life to have a meaning beyond, just myself. And of course, sport is a very self-centered, proposition. And I, wanted to kind of take what I knew and build that into the world, but also the love of nature and being outside through scouts and through my canoeing career. I've been to some beautiful places and been lucky enough to travel to some amazing places. But also I witnessed, I went to Rio. I went to Rio just before the 2016 games and saw our, fabulous canoe course built in the middle of a favela filled with, poverty and really difficult scene, a difficult kind of holding of those two things. Our kind of fun playground for a few weeks, and then what was going on there. And we know these favelas were cleared for our canoe course. It was really uncomfortable. And I went, I did a training camp, for example, in Dubai. There's a canoe course in Dubai one winter. And I just felt horribly conflicted inside. We flew there, massive carbon footprint, a very oppressed country, kind of a dangerous country in many ways, Dubai and United Arab Emirates, if you, stray outside the rules. And I felt really uncomfortable being there. We're in the middle of a desert, water, everywhere. And I was like, what, I felt really wrong. So when I retired, by the time I retired, I was kind of ready to kind of do something about this. And I studied a degree in psychology where I learned about social psychology. And then I started to learn about power and neoliberalism and, global capitalism and all of those things. And that kind of started to all kind of mesh. It all kind of came together around about 2017, 2018, 2019. And I found myself here now working for, Insure Our Survival, doing this thing. But just doing whatever I can. I put my name to anything that I feel is kind of where my somewhat small scale sporting status can help.
What a journey. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see how that leads one to be kind of interacting so much time, and that spending time traveling around different parts of the world and interacting with nature can really is so eye-opening. And it's very interesting as well because I was obviously there for the 2012 Olympics, and just before the 2016 Olympics I went to Brazil.
Oh,
And
cool.
I wasn't there while they happened, but I was there in the months leading up to it. And I remember kind of the controversy in Sao Paulo, and particularly in Rio, of kind of the way that the government was preparing for the Olympics and
Mm.
different things that were going on. And I can imagine what a kind of juxtaposition it must have been to go from the London Olympics and that being such a great kind of high to the Rio Olympics. And as an athlete, you must have really had a first-hand view of all of that as well, and then taking part in all of it, and in some way surely feeling culpable in it as well. um, and as you said, you kind of then transitioned and you tried to use a name, which is really incredible. How was that change for you? Did things change for you personally and the way that you were seen, kind of going from this champion and gold medalist for Great Britain to now using that same status to kind of campaign for things that, especially Extinction Rebellion has been so heavily villainized in the media and in the UK. And, we've seen people get locked up for incredibly long amount of time under the new protest laws. So how has that been for you as well? And has there been a change in the attitude towards you as well?
Yeah. Um, Thank you. I'll just quickly set something straight because I didn't probably quite explain it, but I did not compete in Rio in the end. The reason I went to Rio just before the games was as a reserve crew. So I saw enough, let me be honest. I mean, there's plenty. I didn't actually get to compete, but um, you know, the Rio Games. But London, if you look into the history of London Olympics, it's not super awesome in several respects as well. And I encourage people to look into that. The Olympics is a fantastic project of public relations, and behind the scenes, as far too many things are, it's really just about money and exploitation, and making a fast buck for on the backs of people. So to go to your question, I mean, the the thing that so Champions for Earth was really a good thing to do because it was recognizing the power of sports and trying to empower other sports people. Because we know, there was that famous moment where Cristiano Ronaldo removed the Coca-Cola bottle from his press conference, and everyone was like, "Oh, Cristiano, what are you doing?" And he was like, he talked about Coca-Cola and plastic pollution, and plastic pollution is really important. But we also know it's just one facet of a whole myriad of harmful aspects. But Champions for Earth was for me really good, and is. I'm still doing it. But when Extinction Rebellion came along, it was a radical proposition. And I think what's interesting is that sports is a very radical game. Radical is a word we need to kind of reclaim because it's come to be associated with very dark, dangerous, horrible things. But I think sports is a very radical business because radical just means taking the shortest route from where you are to your goal, to your destination. And sports is all about that. And so I think what Extinction Rebellion was proposing was actually kind of my street, because they were saying, protesting on the streets by doing marches and single day manifestations of people power just ignored. Signing petitions, writing to your MPs. Where are we now? We're not nowhere near the safety mark. And Extinction Rebellion said, you can take part in non-violent direct action, you can risk your liberty. And at the time in the UK, 2019, our anti-protest laws were, we didn't really have any, I suppose. We had certain things you couldn't do, but Extinction Rebellion were taking disruptive action on the streets, and you could risk, not a great deal if you were, let's say, kind of white skin, normal looking kind of person. We know certainly in the UK, the Metropolitan Police, which is the police force that polices London, is institutionally racist, misogynistic, transphobic. There's a really big issue. But a lot of people thought, like me, actually, I can take that risk. I can take action. There may be people who can't, or maybe people who prefer, think it's too dangerous for them. Understand, but we can. So there was many hundreds, and actually many thousands of people chose to risk arrest, taking action, and I felt really, really proud about that. And I felt it was a good moment for me and I have to say, I consider myself to be a minor celebrity, right? I'm not famous. I have to stress that. I kind of say I'm a 3 out of 10 celebrity. A lot of people watch canoeing in the Olympics and would remember that moment, but they have no idea if I'm walking past as a street supermarket, whatever. I'm left completely alone. Someone like me, um, getting arrested and saying this is why I'm doing this and this is right and correct, I believe helped to legitimize and empower that movement. And my hope was that more cultural figures, celebrity type people would also join in. I think, let's call them higher up the food chain, a 5 out of 10 and then a 7 and then a 9 out of 10. And then you'd get some, globally significant figures, not just, moving a bottle aside, but actually, taking a stand on the streets and building huge people power. Because what we're talking about here, it's not crazy. It's the most responsible and sensible thing a person can do. If you want a better future, or if you want a good future, I think investing in protecting the planet, and in fact, once you start to think about that, all the other things that kind of get drawn into it makes a great deal of sense. Because if you don't, um, we're gonna get into big problems, and we already are. And there are people out there who are already in big trouble. So to me, it was just a sensible, responsible thing to do with my position as a citizen, with a somewhat elevated platform. I could lend my weight to this thing and hopefully make it a success. And to a degree, I would argue, well, not to a degree, Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future was successful. There was a few years where climate action, climate emergency really got into the public sphere, and there was a lot of changes and it had a big impact. I don't think it quite managed to create the kind of revolution in thinking and action that we needed. And I suppose, in Extinction Rebellion, we often talk about, kind of a compassionate revolution. Yeah, we don't want bloody, horrendous stuff. What we want is a more caring, kinder world where people aren't exploited and brutalized, where people can live decently with respect, in harmony with nature, and nature and it's in all its beauty and diversity can also flourish as well. That isn't actually that stupid a thing compared to what we're doing right now. So I felt just so proud to be a part of Extinction Rebellion, and it did a great deal, I think. And that model, in that kind of decentralized model, went all around the world, and there's Extinction Rebellion groups all around the world, and they're doing their best. Though we know that the fossil fuel uh, forces, the darkest and most dangerous forces on the planet, are fighting back and have been fighting back very effectively in recent years. Especially, they've captured our governments, they've captured our media, and we have now, fierce anti-protest laws in the UK. And we see, some of the world leaders who are literally mouthpieces for the fossil fuel industry. They're paid for by them. They've got think tanks backing them that are funded by fossil fuels, and also arms. Let's be honest, because again, they're very often quite closely related. Um, and we've got to try to stop them, because they're killing us, and that means that we have a duty as citizens to stand up and try to resist. And in the end, it's going to be, some parts of the world, it's very clear what their choice is. They either resist, or they're going to die, or they're going to be turfed off their land, and then they're going to have a horrible life. They've got to resist. And we have the choice right now, and we can do that. And I think it's correct to do so.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, what do you say to those people who, we know that there's a certain sentiment among people who don't necessarily feel the urgency of environmental action, and who perhaps kind of quite rightly, because we are kind of facing such a multipolar crisis in the world right now of, mental health crisis and housing crises and all those kind of thing. So what is kind of your appeal and your argument to those people of why it's important in some way, shape or form to get involved? And what are some of the little things that you can do as well as a person, because those issues can feel kind of so huge and overwhelming. How does one person sitting somewhere do something about a planet,
Yeah.
being faced with extinction?
Wow. These are huge questions. I'll try and tackle one chunk at a time. I'll do the second one first, because in some ways that's easier. So, as individuals, especially in the global north, we are embedded in harmful systems, right? Just being kind of alive um, means our lives will be having impacts around the world on human beings and on non-human beings, because it's very, very difficult to not be a part of that. But we can actually, as individuals, choose to withdraw as much as we can from some of those things. So I am actually I've taken a flight free pledge. I don't fly anymore. I travel overland when I can. Well, not when I can. When I travel anywhere, I travel overland. I try to reduce the amount of traveling that I do to stay as local as possible. I try and use public transport when I can, and use my own car as little as possible. Now, I know there is experiences out there, and there's people, again, some people don't have a transport infrastructure that makes that sort of possible. And, I'm half Canadian. My sister lives in Canada. My best friend, my crewmate Tim, who I won the Olympics with, lives on the other side of Canada. I miss them greatly, but I know that the harm that I would do to them indirectly by traveling over there, frequently, let's say, would be horrendous. And it's a small piece of horrendous, but it's still a piece, and I can choose to not do that. Sometimes they come over and visit, and I'm very grateful, but it feels difficult, and that's a tough thing to do, and it's just something that I can explain to people. You don't necessarily have to stop flying entirely, and maybe in certain places in UK and Europe, maybe it's a bit easier to do that. In certain parts of the US, you just can't get around. Probably you just have to fly, but maybe you don't, and maybe you can really trick that down. And then maybe if you have to fly for earning a living, maybe you don't have to fly all the way to New Zealand for a 3-week holiday or whatever it is. I think that's worth people looking at that, challenging themselves, and saying to themselves, the world is a beautiful place. I love all these beautiful things that I see in nature, but what I'm doing does harm them. And where is the balance in that? I know that's challenging, probably for you and many other people, but exploring that and being open faced to it, I think, is a part of the times that we're living in. The times of consequence free, thought free actions are behind us. No one used to know about this stuff, and now we do, and you can choose. I also think as an individual, we can be much more careful about what we consume. We don't have to consume anywhere near as much as we do. Just don't participate in buying stuff. Can I say bullshit on your podcast? You can always edit it out, right? There's so much bullshit that we are uh, fit to purchase. If we knew what we were trading for all that stuff compared to a safe and happy future, we might. Well, we would. I'm absolutely sure we would choose, if we knew the impact of some of what we're doing, we really lived it in those places that are impacted. We would be like, nah, I don't need that extra, you know, whatever it is, pair of shoes or whatever like that. I'll make mine last a bit longer or whatever it is. I'm not saying, again, people have to live certain ways, and people might feel there's certain choices they don't have to, that they have to make. Fair enough. But we can, change. And again, in the households, you can choose to have renewable electricity tariffs. Really important thing, your insurance. Who do you bank with? There's a lot of the banks that we give our money to are literally funding the misery of our future. They are literally taking our money and investing it in stuff that's going to make our future more horrible. And that to me is absolutely insane. So I would say those are sort of things that, once you start to see I came into this as an environmental, looking to essentially just wanted to look after the planet. And I just thought, oh, we need to just look after the planet. But then as you start to investigate more and more deeply, or you just start to learn, it kind of starts to become that things start to point to the same thing, right? There's different things going on in the world, but most of them point to the harmful, extractivist, colonial, patriarchal systems that we hardly see as individuals, that we, especially in the global north, let me say, they're more visible in some parts of the world. But we hardly see them because that's just our lives. But once you start to see them, you start to think, actually, I'm less comfortable doing this. And sometimes we're just so trapped in them, we can't change. But sometimes we can, sometimes we can just withdraw from them. And I think I would encourage everybody as an individual act that you can take is to explore protest and what methods you can do as an individual, what organizations you can join as an individual that will affect real change. Because when people come together, real change is possible. And that we can do as an individual, because what we really need to change is the systems that are killing us. Our global systems, the systems of political systems, our economic systems, they need to be changed because they're killing us. And one way or the other, they're either going to collapse under their own weight and because of the toxicity that they've created, or we're going to find a way to change them. And I don't see any other direction. That's where we're going, and we're better off, as a sports person. I guess that's where I say, do you want to win a race? Do you want to win a gold medal? Well, you may as well get training. I'm not saying this is like a winning a gold medal. This is far, far different, far more complicated. But we got to get to the gym. Yeah, we got to get out there and get training. We got to get involved in this. There's no point in just saying, oh, I want things to turn out okay. We're going to get them to turn out okay. It's going to take some effort from us all.
For people that aren't as interested in environmentalism or perhaps aren't as absorbed into it, what would you say to them for why they should get involved in environmentalism?
I think that the environmental emergency for different people as different kind of levels of relevance. For some people, they just don't see it, they don't get it. But I do think a lot of people, especially in the global north, will probably every day walk past a homeless person, or will know people in their lives that are suffering from terrible mental health, or they will watch the news and they will see absolutely horrendous things going on in the news. They will see, for example, in the UK right now, we're seeing an upswing of anti-immigration sentiment, racism, racists emboldened, and those things might concern you. You might be thinking about various struggles, and lots of people will be concerned about these. And when you get into them, and I encourage people just to find out a bit more, don't just go to anyone on YouTube and listen to what they've got to say, because they might not be right. They might have a particular viewpoint, or might not be correct. But try and learn a little bit, or find people that you think you can trust. Speak to people that or find organizations nearby and chat to them and see what you think of what they say. Because when you start to look and peel back and explore these various, let's call them injustices or struggles, we time and again just see that these issues are rooted in the system of the way that we do things, our political and economic system, which right now is based fundamentally around, it's called neoliberalism, neoliberal capitalism, which is a very exploitative system that's designed, fundamentally hardwired to exploit people all the way from the very bottom to the very top of the food chain. It's fundamentally designed, baked into it to exploit, to take the good things from something and leave the bad things, the crap, the waste, the pollution, the ill effects with someone else to pick up. It's fundamentally part of those things. A lot of these things are baked into the systems that we have. We have, our in the UK for sure, our wealth, our prosperity, which certainly is evenly distributed, is based on our colonial past. And our colonial past, you cannot help, if you read about it, not think, oh my God, we're not quite as good as we often think we are. And lots of countries in the global north have a history either with the UK or with other colonial powers or our former colonial powers. And that is a massive legacy of that racism, um, built in and built upon over many decades, centuries in some cases. It's just we see them over and over again, and we see these struggles, patriarchy, the effects of that, and we can discuss which came first, which is the worst, which is the root cause, but they're all together in, to me, bound in one horrible system of exploitation that creates pressure and misery, creates destruction and harm. And we can start to see how different parts of these different struggles actually all lead to one place, or that we're all actually more together. And I think some people also talk about inequality, and how that so many of the world's problems are driven by inequality, and inequality is getting worse. And people can start to see that the problem is not the brown skinned guy who's come over on a boat from another country. It's actually the billionaires who are dividing us, and who have captured our democracy, captured our media, and are persuading us otherwise. So to me, it's really important to not be okay with what's going on. Our system is toxic. Our society is making people sick mentally. It's making people sick physically. It's making our communities fractured and unhealthy. And we don't have to. That's not just the way of the world. It's not just human nature for these things to happen. We are capable of so much better, and I believe that is uh, it's easy. It's not a nice thing to admit, because once you admit it, it kind of means you feel like you probably should try and help or do something about it. But I think that's okay. We are in uncomfortable times, and it's okay to feel not that great. And we know that people out there suffering from mental ill health are often people who are just feeling the weight of the world and feeling the pressure of their lives, financial pressures, relational pressures, disconnection, isolation, disempowerment. Those things are because of our toxic society, toxic system, and we can do better with more democracy, with more equality, with more compassion, with more kindness, more connection. We can do those things in a small scale in our lives, and we can also push and resist the things that are basically holding us and entrapping us in this very bad way of living.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of goes back to uh, uh, one of my favorite memes from the old school internet when it was good, which said a banker, a worker, and a migrant are sat at a table with 20 cookies, and the banker takes 19 of the cookies and says to the worker, "Watch out, the migrant is coming for your cookie."
Mm. Yeah, I've seen one of them with it's Rupert Murdoch, who's on the table, and he says, "Yeah, watch out, that guy wants your cookie."
I remember growing up hearing when people said that World War III is going to be an online war and a war of information, and I think that is proved so true, especially nowadays. Looking around at social media, looking around at the news, there is kind of a war going on for our minds, and even just for our concept of reality and what is real and what
Mm.
is not real, and what
Yeah.
is proportionally important and not important. What is some of your, we've touched upon kind of that things are difficult and hard at the moment, and that there's a lot of mental illness going on. So what is kind of some of the struggles that you faced during your time as an Olympian and as an environmental campaigner, and how did you overcome those struggles, and what tips and tricks do you kind of share for that?
Thank you. Yeah, I kind of chuckle here because when I look back, and I love my canoeing community. It's my home and my family, and those people are the people I love and care about a lot. But when I look back and I see the struggles of sport, and really what we were trying to do was trying to do this very narrow thing extremely really well, and putting incredible resources into it, both our energy, time, but also physical resources, human and physical resources. And I kind of think, well, that's nothing compared to, trying to stop global neoliberal capitalism from eating us. But I say in my defense, sport is a very place to kind of practice and work within the kind of breadth of human emotions and the kind of full spectrum of our humanity, because when you're a sports person and when we watch sports, we identify with what's going on very often because we can see humanity being expressed. We can see despair, rage, we can see passion, we can see victory, we can see comebacks, redemption, we can see humility, we can see, we sometimes see, the other less desirable things, arrogance, lack of grace, triumphalism, and all those sorts of things. But so sport, when I was an athlete, I was living it. It was everything to me. It was like a life and death struggle. And I say that very consciously because it's absolutely not life and death. But we know that some athletes do actually suffer very grave, consequences and mental health and physical issues. So in some ways it is, but let's be honest, for most people it's not. But it feels like it. So you explore methods for dealing with your life and for striving towards your goal that are feel so important, but it's fundamentally mostly safe. Let's just say, there are experiences out there horrible, but let's just say that for most people, sport is mostly safe. So in sport, it's about sustaining a sustained maximum effort over a great period of time to get good enough at a skill to become a champion or to become extremely excellent at it, to master that skill, you might call it. And there's a kind of thing there between excellence and mastery versus winning and, attaining a championship position. And there's a big difference because winning a race or a competition involves everybody else. For you to win a race, everyone else has got to be less good than you. But to achieve excellence and mastery is a very much more personal thing. You're more in control of what you're doing. So I think for me, it was about using those two pieces of their kind of two different fuels. One is this kind of yearning and striving to be a champion, which, we can talk a little bit about what may come from. And the other fuel is this desire, and this kind of compulsion to just try and do something really, really well because you just want to, because it feels good, because it makes you feel good when you do it well. And if you can use those two fuels, you can get an incredible kind of burst of energy. The kind of winning fuel can be a dark fuel because it can take you in a bad direction. It can be really painful when you're not winning. And mastery can also kind of take you off in slightly odd directions. You can go down into rabbit holes of ineffectiveness or kind of. But when you bring those two things together and you combine it with a perspective, you have to keep your eye on the trees and on the wood. Sometimes you have to zoom out and see where you're going, navigate, and other times you have to be really involved in the detail. And I would argue that activism, and in fact any endeavor out there in the world beyond sport, has those elements, right? I think it's important. And in my life now as an activist and a campaigner, I know that it's vital to sustain myself. Very often people are getting burnt out and ruined by the work they're doing. And it draws you in and you can't help it sometimes. But it's a vital part of our practice to somehow find a way of sustaining that. And that does mean holding this kind of hot, spiky, difficult thing, but we sometimes have to put it down and look after ourselves and balancing and learning. There's techniques, there's methods, I suppose, there's mindsets. It's not necessarily a technique. It's about understanding what we're doing and understanding that if we burn ourselves out, we're not going to win. We got to find a way of continuing. We got to find a way of sharing the load. And I sometimes have an analogy. I'm not a cyclist, but it's like a peloton in cycling. You know, in a peloton, you have a ton of cyclists and they're all trying to get to the finish line, but they do work together. And the strongest cyclist goes to the front and they bury themselves for a minute or however long. And then once they're tired out, they fall back into the peloton and the next strongest person comes forward and they bury themselves for a bit. And then the next strongest person. And once everyone's knackered and they've all done a big push, then the least tired person, the next, least fatigued person, then goes to the front, and then it's the second week, least fatigued person, and that is kind of what we need to do. We need to push on and push on, do our bit, and then we can drop back and have faith that other people will come forwards as well. And I think that's really important. And I think that there is a faith in humanity, which I believe is really important to kind of foster. And for me, this is my kind of it's my faith. So through sport, I believe in human potential. I believe that people are capable of incredible things. Nobody knows what you're capable of, and you don't either. And I'm talking about physical things, but I'm also talking about growth, and I'm talking about things you can learn, things you can develop, abilities you can grasp and master. You may not actually ever get to be able to run 100 meters in 10 seconds, but you probably can run them far faster than you imagine. And that's, and I'm going to say just a little bracket, of course, here, depending, I don't want to kind of be too ableist in my kind of position here, right? Because some people not being able to run and do that, but I would argue that every person, no matter what their ability, can build on their ability, probably in ways that they may not realize, and can improve. Again, now I'll put another bracket, depending on their circumstances, right? Because there's some places in the world, doesn't matter how talented you are, you need support to do that, and you need opportunities. But I would still argue a kind of internal game and possibility of growth and improvements is possible. And I would think that this belief in human potential, for me, that says a person can change themselves, they can have an impact in the world that they cannot conceive of, and other people have no idea. That to me is an article of faith, because we see people all around the world. I see examples of not that all the time. I see bad things, but I also can see a faith is something that you sometimes hold on to despite the evidence, right? And I actually think there's lots of evidence of human potential, so I'm fine with that. And if we believe in human potential, if I believe in human potential, that means that I have faith we can believe that change is possible, change is non-linear, it can happen, and we've got to be in the game. Absolute guaranteed way of losing a game or losing a match or not doing well in the competition is to come out of the competition and to sit on the sidelines or not to enter. So I think we've got to get into the game and we've got to sustain and grow and be challenged. And I think one thing that I certainly have taken from my sporting life into my activism is we've got to get the basics right. In sports, it's super important to go to sleep properly, eat properly, drink properly, have some resting time, have some space for your mental unwinding. Those kind of basic things I think are quite vital for sustaining what we're doing as activists and campaigners. I also think another element that is important is sports doesn't teach us about the struggles of lots of other people. So we've got to be open-minded and learning. So my sport is not completely, but is very much kind of white, probably a fairly middle class endeavor. So we don't necessarily, through my sport, have heard of the experiences of other people who are different than me, who've had different lives, different opportunities, and different challenges. So as an activist, I've really had to learn a lot about that, to hear and to be prepared to be challenged, right? I had no idea about a lot of this stuff when I really set out. And yeah, it's pretty uncomfortable sometimes for someone to come up to you and say, do you know what you've just said? Do you know, like, the way that you acted there, how I experienced that, how I felt when you did that? And I can't deny, I blundered around, probably have done a bit even right now. I'm completely open to be challenged and to try to learn. It is difficult, and I do think sport in some ways does and equip you, because development, change, growth is painful. It can be challenging. It can hurt, but if you can have the support to process that, and the recovery to allow you to kind of assimilate, and then you can bounce back and you can become better in some ways than you were before. There's more to you than there was before as a result of that. And that's definitely a kind of principle from sport that carries through. I think that's, really, really important, because the process of change in the world is not like a sports individual sports game. It's like a monster sized team sport, when there's there is an opposition, but in a way there isn't an opposition. We can just crack on with doing the job, and we can have a perspective that means I'm going to do what I can do, and you focus on what you can do, not on what you can't do. There is a certain boundary of beyond which we can't influence, but perhaps we can together influence that. Perhaps if you join the right group or with the right people, you can influence that somewhat. But we also have to be humble about, what we can achieve, but at the same time also have faith in humanity, that actually, when the opportunity comes for people to do the right thing and to do things that are good and positive in the world, a majority of people will actually do that. I truly believe that. There's a lot of toxicity out there, and there's lots of reasons why people sometimes don't do that. But I think, we see sometimes, and we see frequently in times of stress, and times of difficulty, we do see beauty and we see humanity, and we can take, joy, and we can have creativity in these situations that are good for our soul, nourish our spirit, and can keep us going. And if we're going to succeed, we're going to have to bring all of our humanity into this, and that is, again, I'm not just saying that for fun. It's not an easy thing to do, but trying to do that as a conscious effort is is a good I think it's a good way of living. For me, it's a good way of carrying on my life, and I believe I can only do my best at that. And I think if I manage it as best as I do, I'm prepared to be challenged at it, be humble, but also trying, then hopefully most people will think it's okay, and I will also have a good impact in the world.
Yeah, I think that's so profound. I mean, as life, as a living beings, the whole purpose of and definition of being alive, and one of them is growth, isn't it? And that we are always growing and becoming something and changing into
Mm.
something new. And I've always felt that people are kind of divided as we grow into people that keep trying and pushing for that growth, and people that at different points have given up on trying and pushing for that growth. And, one of my sayings is always, you can be bitter or better in life.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that's so profound in hearing that, especially from that aspect of always finding a way to kind of get back up again and push yourself again, even when things are hard. And
I
also
mean,
hearing about how you navigate burnout, which I think is a
mm,
massive thing in society right now, with people really even just trying to pay their bills and,
I mean,
doing
I think it
multiple
is worth
jobs
saying, like,
and parenting.
I just wanted to just quickly say something, because I think the system that, again, I'm going to say mostly that we live in, the global north, whatever, is really designed or set up to, I think, crush your humanity in order just to make you a economic unit and a participant in the economy. So if you do feel like you've given up, or you feel like giving up, or you are so beat down that you're not sure if you can get back up, a lot of times people feel kind of bad about that, as if like there's something wrong with them, and they've somehow failed, and they're not good enough. And I just think I just wanted to chip in there, because that's exactly kind of what's supposed to happen. It crushes and exploits and suppresses the best of us, the best parts of us, and also some of the most kindest, gentlest, beautiful people are the first to get ground up in this machine. So I think it's okay. We do have to take some responsibility and we do have to be accountable for ourselves, but we can also admit that there's something else going on. It's not just us. And therefore you can release yourself of some of the guilt, some of the loathing, some of the judgment, because that is one of the key ways that society holds you in this very restricted space, and it will make you unwell because it's fundamentally inhuman. It's not giving you what a human being is needing to be nourished, and that's why we see, mental ill health, but we also see behaviors, consumption and methods of self-medication of all sorts of unhealthy ways. There's lots of different ways out there that are kind of bad for you, and because we got to fight against that. We got to admit that this is brutal, but that also that we can fight against it by coming together and resisting the root causes of it and pushing to change the system that has made us feel like this and made our lives like this, because it doesn't have to be like that. A lot of people think that it does, but it doesn't. There are alternatives. There are people out there doing differently, and they're doing probably lots of ways better than our.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is something that we all kind of experience, and especially capitalism, that kind of pushes us towards this push towards individualism rather than collectivism as well, where everything becomes personal responsibility, which again in environmentalism, as much as we said, what is it that people can do individually? As you've said, it's a team effort. That's not something that any one of us can affect individually, and trying to figure out those that can be equally like that with your life as well. As you said, things like opportunities, things like being in the right place, meeting the right people, having the right trainer, for example, as an athlete or whatever it is. Those are also things where we can divest some of that personal responsibility and guilt and shame and blame, and actually just realize, I'm just one person in this sea and ocean of a system, as you said, that has been built up that we're not even designed to process. And I think that's one of the things where, education is, as amazing as education can be, there's a huge aspect of that that is simply just training us to process this weird system that we've created and how to function as a human being, and a lot of us simply don't.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And the education system, again, so this is interesting, right? We're talking about environmentalism, we're talking about insurance and genocide and climate breakdown, and then we're coming to education. And again, this is just an example to me of when you start to think about what's going wrong, the threads start to kind of come together. And yeah, our education system, I think, fails a great many people, or it trains us to be in a certain way. And there's so much more that we can do. And I think a lot of teachers are amazing people. I know lots of teachers, and I think very often they want to do more than they can just to teach. The best teachers that I've ever had were teaching us about us and being people, rather than just history or science or whatever. But yeah, education certainly is a key. But what we mustn't do, I think, just to say something here, I think very often there is this almost like a fallacy in the environmental movement, and probably even in the wider kind of movements for change, is we kind of go, oh, we just need to tell people about what's going on and then they'll change. We just need to tell people about, and we can kind of see that actually that's not worked, because there are systems of power that are actively blocking you from doing those things. They're actively holding you in the track that you're in. So just knowing what's going on isn't really enough. And a lot of people kind of know that something's wrong, They know probably more than they might admit, and they maybe know just enough to know that it's not right. But mostly we need to actually think about how we're going to change this and think about theories of change and what we can do. And then you feel empowered rather than just kind of knowing, oh, that's what's going on. That's bad. Now you think, actually, I know at least what I can do to try and do something about it. And that is where health comes in, right? That is, like I say, something about like medicine, action is good medicine. I think Greta Thunberg said, hope ends and action begins. Feeling really bad and feeling unwell for all various reasons, action is a good medicine. Even if you're still sick and struggling, sometimes action can make you feel better. And in fact, action repays you with more energy and it can help a great deal. Again, not everyone's ability, time, energy, finances, resources can do that, but some small part of it can actually be very, very beneficial, I would say. And that to me is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, And what do you think, in kind of in amongst everything that you've seen, gives you some hope other than just a belief and a faith in humanity? Are there any particular things that you've encountered or things that you've managed to achieve already where you go, wow, we really, we might not be there yet, but I can see that we, see these little steps that we're on the way to actually changing things for the positive.
Well, I think that's a great thing to say, Phoenix, because there are many examples out there of good things that are going on, right? Not just in environmental, ecological senses, but in terms of resisting, building new cultures and systems, people being kind and gentle, supporting each other, connecting, being in communities, building, rebuilding those fabrics of society that have become kind of so frayed and been stretched to the point of breakage. I I'm not going to bring out particular examples because you know I think to me it's about you can see them, they're out there, and they're in all sorts of places. You can find good news websites, you can look up. I think it is important to kind of consume some of that stuff and to see victories and to see, but I think that is a kind of a slight mindset shift that I would say I'll just use a sporting analogy because it kind of is easy. And that's one of the good things about sport is it can kind of use analogies like this. I'd say it doesn't matter what the score line is. You can still play as hard as you can. You can still bring out that. I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do, but your ability, your capacity to play as well as you can doesn't is independent of the scoreline. Of course, it's harder if you're feeling all beat up and knocked down and crushed, but that actually is something that you can change the framing of, and you can say, right, well, that is the scoreline, and now I'm going to do this. So we see, I don't know, tennis is a great example, right? You see tennis players and they're kind of battling each other, bashing it back and forth, and you can see sometimes a person is winning in the match, and then all of a sudden, one player, the opponent who's doing the worst, does something, and all of a sudden it changes the complexion of the match. And I think that's very important to hold on to. And I sort of alluded to it at another point, this kind of non-linearity of change. And because just as people can change without us realizing, without other people realizing, change happens behind our eyes, some people say, right? We don't know. Sometimes it takes a long time for us to build up to that moment where we say, right, that's it, I'm going to do this, and off you go. And other times it's almost like you wake up and it's just spontaneous. And I'm like, that I'm going to do that. And that is the possibility of human beings, maybe other animals, I don't know. But what I want to say is here in this case that we are in this game. We can understand that we are not alone. We know that lots and lots of people out there are struggling, are finding it very, very difficult. They don't want it to continue like this. And given that moment, given the tools, they may find that switch in them. They may find themselves all of a sudden going, this is what I'm going to do. and I say kind of like a revolutionary feeling happen. And again, I'm not advocating for bloody, uh, violent revolutions, but revolutions can happen within us and within our communities of ways of thinking. And I do think that is independent of the scoreline, right? Some of the stories that we like the most in culture and in sport are stories of comeback, of redemption, of coming good against the odds. Those things, that is a fundamentally human, beautiful thing. And I think it's important to hold on to that. Again, I don't want to talk about, yeah, I don't know. It's faith. To me, it is faith. And I think it's okay to say that. And I believe in it. And I believe that when things are going badly, and some points they will be getting worse, and some places they're already really bad, there is the possibility for something amazing to happen at a small scale that could spread around, or at a bigger scale that will suddenly burst forth because so many other people are feeling this way. So to me, that is a nice, comforting thing. Maybe I'm just a silly man, fantastical, naive, but I hold on to that because I think it's a healthy way. And I think it's, given the alternatives, it seems as sensible as the other things to do. So I'm going for it, you know?
Absolutely, yeah, and I definitely feel that faith in and of itself, regardless of what it is that you believe in, whether it's a religion, whether it's a goal, whether it's nothing. The power of humans believing in something, I think, over and over in life, I've seen that in and of itself can perform miracles, you know? Um, Before we leave and we wrap this up, let's go back to this incredible Insure Our Survival campaign that's kicking off today. And for someone that's at home, is perhaps listening to this, perhaps, cares about the environment, has never done anything other than trying to, do the plant-based diet, and maybe is thinking, I want to maybe, step out for the first time and get on the street or do a campaign, join the campaign or something. What would you say to them would be the best first step to get involved?
Well, certainly, I would say with Insure Our Survival, it might be that there's nothing going on nearby, or it might be that there is. So uh, keep an eye out. We've got our webpage, insureoursurvival.org. We have a link tree as well, which is Insure Our Survival, and that's got links to different things on there. We are living in a social media world, so it may be that you're not able to participate in an action physical in person, but you can perhaps get out there and advocate and repost, support, engage with our social medias, share them. And also, there's lots of other groups out there that would benefit from you engaging in that way. And I would also say there are pockets of very lovely, beautiful, kind, dedicated people all around the world who are trying to do this. And I would bet my bottom dollar, even though I would bet neither my bottom dollar nor a dollar, but I would bet you that there will be people nearer by to you than you think, that you are not as isolated as you think, that you can join with, and you can feel good about getting connected with them, and starting this work. Ensure Our Survival is a campaign. We would love you to get involved if you're in London on the 8th and 9th. Come along, come and check it out. But it may be that you're a long way from there. There's other things going on around the UK. There'll be other things going on around the world as well. But if you miss the chance, or you don't find that chance, I 100% believe there will be other ways that you can join this battle and feel good, because you're actually investing in your future, and you are doing something. Most human beings want their future to be better, or to go further than where they are just now. Joining this battle in whichever domain, whichever method you choose, is a very, very sensible thing to do. So yeah, if you can support Ensure Our Survival, thank you. Come along, get involved, whatever, that'd be great. But there's always going to be a way to express yourself in our world. I believe, I hope, and I hope, encourage everyone to try and find that and search for it.
Absolutely, yeah. And is there anything else you want the people at home to know?
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it?
maybe just some of the top things that people should just really know
Yeah.
about
Okay.
them and what they're doing.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, AXA is a company that are insuring is carbon bomb projects. And I don't know if people necessarily know what a carbon bomb is. A carbon bomb project is a project that will, across its lifetime, produce so much carbon dioxide or so much carbon dioxide equivalent that it will make keeping us within safe boundaries of global heating. It'll make it impossible. So these carbon bomb projects are like explosive bombs for our aspirations and our needs to stay safe. And AXA are responsible for 222 gigatons of fossil fuel projects emissions, which sounds like it should be a lot, right? And it is. It's equivalent to 71 times the annual emissions of the whole of the European Union. So one company, AXA, is enabling 71 times the amount of emissions that Europe produces in 2024, in this case, to destroy our future. So that is in itself means that we should boycott them, as well as them having profited from insuring, and investing in settler banks in the occupied territories, supporting arms companies like BAE Systems, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon. So AXA are a bad company, and you should not insure anything with them. And tell your friends. And I'll go back a little bit just to AIG again. AIG, we talked about ECOP, this horrendous pipeline that's basically just designed to drain the wealth and resources out of Africa and give the profits to already horrendously rich people and corporations beyond its shores. ECOP is a terrible thing, but they're also AIG are also part of a consortium that are developing a gas field off the coast of Gaza on Israel's behalf. So this is one of the things that a lot of people who are studying and learning about this might not realize. There's a real dash for fossil fuels behind the scenes of what's going on in Gaza, and AIG are right in there. So, and another example, AIG are also very much involved in liquid natural gas, or LNG, which is a very, very damaging form of fossil fuels, because it is essentially methane, which lasts for a short time in our atmosphere, but is much more powerful than CO2. That's what natural gas is. It's methane. And when that leaks, when you have big pipelines and when you have big ports that put it onto ships, lots and lots leaks out, and it's really, really bad. And AIG are involved in massive LNG projects in around the Gulf Coast of the United States. So AIG, again, if you have any dealings with them, if you're in Europe and the UK, perhaps not, but AIG stands for American Insurance Group. So they're going to be big in other parts of the world, especially in North America. If you've got anything to do with them, or if you've got anything to do with their subsidiaries, pull the plug, go elsewhere, do a bit of work, and feel good about what you're doing. So I think that is a good thing for me to have explained.
Absolutely, yeah. And hopefully everyone at home is able to check out Insure Our Survival for more information on how they can change their insurance and put their money into something that is not tearing apart our world. Etienne, thank you so much for being a guest this week on the podcast. I'm wishing you and the Insure Our Survival campaign the absolute best for, I think it's running for a couple weeks.
Yes, from the 8th to the 22nd of September. But hopefully this is just the beginning, and we're going to keep pushing on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you so much for being a guest on. For everyone at home, please go and check them out, see what you can do to support. And thank you so much for tuning into this very, very special episode of the Phoenix and Friends podcast. And I will see you next week.